Subconscious Power, Chapter 5, Subconscious Emotion and Memory. The subconscious plays such an important part in the processes of emotion and memory, respectively, that it truly may be said that without taking into consideration the part played in them by the subconscious, there can be no intelligent understanding of the nature of emotion or memory, nor of their manifestations. The subconscious and the emotions. In the regions of the subconscious lie the emotional tendencies and inclinations which rise into conscious manifestation upon contact with the objects which furnish the stimuli for such manifestation. You have often been surprised by the rise into conscious feeling of certain emotional tendencies of the existence of which you have heretofore been unaware. You have often found dwelling within your inner nature the material for feelings and emotions from which you had previously dreamed yourself entirely free. It has been well said that in the subconscious emotional nature of every individual, there is to be found the whole menagerie of elemental feelings, the animals awaiting only the opening of the door of consciousness to make their appearance. Your feelings and emotions are determined not alone by your conscious sensations and ideas, but also by your imperceptible influence of subconscious impressions, of which only the sum of the resulting effects manifest in consciousness. This explains the mystery and inexplicable character of so many of your emotional experiences, the uprush of unsuspected feelings. Not knowing the definite causes of these mental states, you find them incomprehensible. You have within you a quiet and unseen growth of subconscious emotional influences, which often prove to be important factors in your mental life. You are not conscious of the existence of these influences until, when the appropriate stimuli call them forth, they manifest a distinctly marked character and often a decided urge to action. Psychoanalysis of quite a simple character tends to reveal the existence of some of these hidden emotional states, of which it has been said, they, more than knowledge, make us what we are. But there still exists within us an even larger area of such emotional character, which is unsuspected by us and of which we become aware only under exceptional circumstances. Only extended and deep psychoanalysis reveals these elements to us. So far below the surface of consciousness do they lie. Professor Joseph Jastrow says, a still larger and more vital part lies submerged in the subconscious areas of character and disposition, effectively modifying the organic efficiency and the quality of our talents, yet so subtly, so fluidly, as to impart an unanalyzable genius to all that is most worthwhile in what we feel and think and do and are. Such emotional factors of our psychology penetrate more fundamentally than do the intellectual ones into the fiber of our being, and so are more intrinsically influences of the subconscious order, more submerged, more intuitive, and less revealed. The subconscious emotional material from which your conscious emotional states are created and composed may be arranged for convenience into the following three classes. These, however, are not being mutually exclusive. One, emotions arising from physical causes. This class of subconscious emotional material arises from physical conditions themselves unperceived by conscious sensation, but which manifest in subconscious emotional states, which gradually rise to the place of consciousness. In this class are included your moods, which arise without any relation to your actual experiences with the outside world. You are not conscious of what is going on in your internal physical organism except in cases of marked abnormal conditions. But your subconscious is aware of these physical conditions and frequently reflects them in the form of emotional states. Far more soul experiences arise from reflected physical conditions than we usually realize or are willing to concede. One's romantic melancholy is very frequently the direct result of an inactive liver reflected in the subconscious emotional states, or perhaps from subconscious sexual activities or processes. Number two, combinations of minute emotional material. This class of emotional material consists of the scattered elements of personal experience, each of which is too weak or unimportant to manifest as emotion, but which, combined and fused by the subconscious, thereafter tend to rise to the conscious levels of the mind. You are constantly reviewing such emotional material of which you are not conscious at the time. Emotional experiences must be of a certain magnitude or intensity in order to rise to the plane of consciousness. Liu says, many impressions are either so faint in themselves or so familiar, so submerged in stronger impressions, or so incapable of exciting trains of reflex feeling in the preoccupied mind that we are neither conscious of them when present, nor capable of remembering them afterward. And as Rebote says, a certain amount of time is necessary for an impression to be perceived. And an essential condition of consciousness is wanting when the duration of the nervous process falls below the minimum. But although not recognized in consciousness, many of such emotional impressions tend to unite and become fused together in the subconscious, and thus acquire such strength as to cause disturbances on the conscious surface of the mind. As Holmes says, they never emerge into consciousness, but yet make their influence felt among the perceptible mental currents, just as the unseen planets sway the movements of those that are watched and mapped by the astronomer. At other times, these fused impressions of the subconscious will acquire such vigor that they will cause a veritable upheaval on the conscious plane. They will fairly explode into consciousness in a way startling to the individual who previously was not at all aware that he just felt just that way about such things. 3, emotions and racial memory. This class of emotional material consists of race experiences transmitted by heredity, though racial memory or instinct, which rise into consciousness when the appropriate stimuli presents themselves. Most of your most fundamental and elemental emotions have come to you in this way, i.e., through racial memory of the past experiences of the race, reaching you as instinctive feeling. Instinct at the last is but inherited racial memory, memory of the past experience of the race. As memory is fundamentally a function and process of the subconscious, it follows that the instinctive emotions are essentially subconscious in character. There flows through you the deep stream of racial memory, which has come down to you from countless generations of the race. In that stream are the materials of some of the most elemental and fundamental emotional states, which rise to the surface of your consciousness when the appropriate stimulus presents itself. The experiences of your long line of ancestors have been impressed upon that racial memory. That memory has been transmitted to you and forms a portion of your subconscious mental records. But do not let this thought disturb you. Do not share the popular false conception of heredity as a bugaboo. As Burbank has said, heredity means much, but what is heredity? Not some hideous ancestral specter forever crossing the path of a human being. Heredity is merely the sum of all the effects of all the environments of all past generations on the responsive, ever-moving life forces. Heredity is merely racial memory and is no more to be feared than is your own individual memory. All of the 3 above stated classes of subconscious emotional states, together with their countless variations and combinations, dwell below the level of consciousness on the great planes of the subconscious, except at such times when they are called into conscious activity, when they spring from the depths, just as the flying fish raising itself into the air from the body of deep water, which is its home. If asked in what form they abide in the subconscious or just where they rest, the only answer is that they abide there in the same general form and rest in the same general region, as does the subconscious memory of the actions of the fingers of the skilled musician, or the subconscious memories of the many things which you have experienced, but of which you are not conscious at the present moment, though the recollection of these will take place when you demand it. You are conscious of only a very small percentage of the things you know, and of that which you feel, and of those actions which you are able to perform proficiently and efficiently. By far the greater part of these mental states or conditions, or whatever you may choose to call them, lies beneath the levels of consciousness in the deep regions of the subconscious, in the depths of that great mental ocean of your being, of which your ordinary consciousness is merely the surface. You would do well to cease thinking of these planes of mentality as places in space. Think of them rather as states of mind. The subconscious and the memory. Of all of the offices and processes of the subconscious, that phase concerned with memory is perhaps the most characteristic. This because memory in some of its aspects is involved in all of the other phases of subconscious mental activity. Memory itself is so involved with subconscious mention that it cannot be disentangled from it. Without the processes of memory, none of the other manifestations of subconscious activity would be possible. And likewise, without the existence of the subconscious, there could not exist that great subconscious storehouse of memory in which the memory records are stored and from which they are brought out in the process of recollection and raised again to the plane of consciousness. Memory, in its most general meaning, is the conscious revival of past mental experiences. It follows logically that the experience, in order to be afterward remembered, i.e., recalled into consciousness, must, in the meantime, be impressed and stored away in some region of the mind. That such region of the mind is not that of the ordinary consciousness we know by personal experience. We know that by effort, we raise these impressions from somewhere up to the plane of consciousness. That somewhere is the realm of the subconscious, that part of the region of the subconscious which is called the storehouse of memory. Halleck says, it has often been asked, where are the images of memory when they are not present in consciousness? We see a man one day, but do not think of him again for a month. We can then call up a distinct image of him. Where was the image of the man during the month? The theory is that the full-fledged idea is in the mind, but slumbering below the stream of consciousness, just as a person is alive when sound asleep without being aware of the fact. When we are not conscious of an idea, it is believed to disappear just as a diver does beneath the surface of the water. And the idea is held to keep its form as intact as does the diver during this disappearance. It is impossible to account for the nature of memory, except upon the hypothesis that there is much in the mind of which we are unconscious. We are conscious of only a small part of what exists in our minds, that which we know to remain in the mind, but of which we are not conscious at the time must be thought of as being stored away in the subconscious. When we recall it, it rises to the plane of consciousness. At all other times, it is below the level of consciousness. Likewise, we could not recognize a past experience as such when it is recalled in some way, unless at least some trace of it had continued to exist in the mind. Many leading psychologists, in fact, have held that an impression once made upon the record sheets of the subconscious always remains there, even though it may never again be called into the conscious field of attention. Likewise, they hold that even though such impressions may never again come into consciousness, nevertheless, they exert a subtle and silent influence upon our views, convictions, habits, feelings, emotions, judgments, and actions. The Freudian school lays great stress upon this fact, and its method of psychoanalysis is directed largely to the work of digging out these submerged memories of past experiences which have been disturbing the emotional balance. Morel says, every single effort of mind is a creation which can never go back again into non-entity. It may slumber in the depths of forgetfulness, as light and heat slumber in the coal seams, but there is, ready at the bidding of some appropriate stimulus, to come out of the darkness into the light of consciousness. Hollander says, we may forget objects and events, that is to say, we may dismiss them from our consciousness, but they are stored up in our subconsciousness to the end of our days. Says another writer, our mental impressions may never again come up before consciousness, but they nevertheless remain in that vast ultra-conscious region of the mind, subconsciously or unconsciously, molding and fashioning our subsequent thought and actions. Fever patients have been known to converse in the language of the country in which their early childhood has been spent, though they had apparently entirely forgotten that tongue. Several typical cases of this kind are recorded in the textbooks, in which patients in delirium have recited long passages, sometimes entire chapters from books in foreign languages, which they did not understand in their normal condition, but which books had been read from in their presence many years before. Persons rescued from drowning or hanging have testified that many of the events of their past lives were presented to their consciousness with utmost clearness and minuteness of detail, and with a lightning-like rapidity of sequence. Dying persons not infrequently go back in memory to the days of their early childhood, and after a lapse of 50, 60, 70, or even more years, will recite the most trifling events of those early days with wonderful minuteness of detail. Cases of this kind are numerous and are too well authenticated to permit of doubt of their substantial correctness. The theory of coincidence is absurd when applied to such cases. Of like nature is the frequent experience of dreams, in which many apparently forgotten incidents of childhood and youth are presented in clear detail. In some instances, the person is convinced of the truth of the recollection only by the assurances of older relatives familiar with the facts of the original experience. Of like nature is the frequent experience of dreams, in which many apparently forgotten incidents of childhood and youth are presented in clear detail. In some instances, the person is convinced of the truth of the recollection only by the assurances of older relatives familiar with the facts of the original experience. The work of the subconscious in the process of memory, however, is not confined to the office of furnishing a subconscious storehouse of memory impressions. It has other and still more complicated tasks. It not only stores away our memory records, but it has also its own particular system of indexing and cross-indexing them, of searching for these records when they are demanded on the conscious plane, and of finding them and presenting them to consciousness, perhaps long after the conscious demand for them has ceased and when the person is thinking about something entirely different. You have often experienced this delayed finding of the missing memory record. After you have given up all hope of ever recalling it to memory, then all of a sudden, the missing name, number, or detail fairly pops into consciousness, sometimes in an almost startling fashion. Let us describe in somewhat fanciful form, yet in a form which accurately represents the actual working out of the processes, these activities of the subconscious which are concerned with memory. In the first place, we shall compare your mechanism of memory recording to the recording apparatus of a phonograph. In each case, the receiving diaphragm and the receiving record are both there. The impression of sensation, emotion, or action is recorded on the moving cylinder of the memory, i.e., of the subconscious mechanism concerned with the memory. The impression may be clear and strong or else faint and weak according to the circumstances of the original experience. Then begin the more complex activities of the subconscious in its processes of memory. The records bearing the impressions are immediately carried below the plane of consciousness and are stored with more or less care depending upon the habit of the individual, in the great storehouse of memory in the realm of the subconscious. But this is only the beginning. The stored away memory records would be of no practical use to you were you unable to find them when needed. Accordingly, the subconscious employs methods tending to facilitate the future finding and presentation of these records. In order that these memory records be rendered available, they must be, 1, stored in a systematic manner, each in a section containing impressions of similar class. 2, plainly labeled so that they may be recognized when seen by the memory clerks employed by the subconscious for this purpose. And 3, carefully indexed and cross-indexed in the memory books of the subconscious so that the loose end of memory may also be taken hold of by the searching clerks. The storing away process, and particularly the indexing and cross-indexing process, constitutes the work of what we have somewhat fancifully called the clerks of the subconscious. In fact, Indeed, they certainly act like real clerks instead of mere processes. There is a great difference in the degree of proficiency of these memory clerks, particularly in the case of the indexers and cross-indexers. This difference depends largely upon the memory training of the individual. Some persons have their memory records so closely cross-indexed that if they cannot find the missing record at once by means of the direct index, they set the memory clerks to work discovering the cross-indexed references to it. And in a short time, the record is found and passed on to the other helpers, who then raise it to the plane of consciousness, where it is placed on the reproducing phonograph of memory and caused to repeat the original impression. So you see, the conscious mentality plays only a subordinate part in the processes of memory. It merely records the impressions and afterward reproduces them when they are placed before its mechanism. The storing, the indexing, the searching, and discovery of the records, and the final raising of the records up to the reproducing mechanism of consciousness, each and all are performed by the subconscious through its processes and clerks. In fact, through the study of the processes of memory, you will gain a much more comprehensive and much more practical idea of the nature of the subconscious and its methods of work than is possible through the study of any other one class of its activities and phenomena. The Freudian school has directed particular attention to the fact that the subconscious sometimes seems determined to make the individual forget certain things which are unpleasant and disagreeable to him, and to encourage the recollection and remembrance of things of an agreeable nature. The many works written by Freud and his followers give many and often quite amusing instances of this particular trait of the subconscious. For instance, one finds it easy to pay a bill containing charges deemed extortionate, or for services not deemed satisfactory. This entirely aside from the common disinclination to part with one's money. Again, he tends to forget promises, engagements, or other duties which are associated with unpleasant persons, things, or events. Moreover, he tends to forget the names of persons and places which have unpleasant associations. Something about him wants to forget it in these cases and tries in many ways to accomplish its purpose. In a recent magazine article, a celebrated psychoanalyst of the Freudian school is quoted as saying, "Earlier students of the mind assumed that forgetting was merely a passive process, the failure to remember. Freud discovered that forgetting is the active effort of the mind to protect the individual from pain and unpleasantness. Unpleasant experiences and people associated with them do not merely slip out of the mind. They are actively thrust out and kept under control by a mechanism which Freud metaphorically termed the censorship. You remember the things you really want to remember. You do the things you really want to do. You recall the people you really like and want to recall. You will discover that the things or the people you forget or lose are associated with something unpleasant and have been automatically relegated by the censor into the limbo of the unconscious." Thus, psychoanalysis adds to the troubles of the husband who seeks to explain to a Freud perfect wife how he came to forget to mail those letters to her relatives, and to those of the lover of a Freud perfect sweetheart who tries to account for the fact that he happened to forget the date of his first meeting with her, or that he overlooked some little thing that she had asked him to do for her. Freud has contributed to the list of the little things which serve to make modern life so complex, particularly for the male of the species.